working as well. So good morning. Thank you, Shane. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here this morning. I really look forward to speaking with you, engaging with you, and sharing some ideas with you. What I would really appreciate, so we can make this more meaningful and more valuable, is if everyone could please switch their cameras on. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do home invasion for those of you still at home. But it would be really good to see you, to have some warmth, to have some humanity in the screen-based life that we're now living in. So if you could please switch your cameras on, keep your mics on mute, and activate the chat function, because I'm going to be asking you questions. My job here today is to have a conversation based on what we have seen with, let's refer to ourselves as SMEs. So businesses with turnovers up to around 300 odd million rands a year. What we have seen in SMEs that we are working with from an Aurik perspective, not only in South Africa, but in the United States, in Europe, and in the UK. All of us face very similar environments. We're sailing in the same seas. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, actually, for the entire world to be involved in the same crisis. So I'll share with you what works, what doesn't work, from the perspective of many others that we've worked with and seen. I want to start off with a question, though. In the last 3 months, in the last 4 months, all of us have learned things about ourselves. We've also learned a lot about our businesses. You know, there's a wonderful, wonderful saying, and it's a naval saying, a sailor's saying, and it says, the salt always finds the truth. And what it refers to is that when seas get rough, the truth around your sailing skills, the truth around your boat, the truth around your ship comes out. Weaknesses in the hull show themselves. And I would be so keen to hear from you through the chat function. What is the one thing that you learned about yourself, about your business, that you thought was sorted pre-COVID in the last 4 months? So let's activate the chat. I really would like to be sure that I am engaging you and in service of you and giving you good feedback. I'll tell you something I learned about myself. And I'll share this. That's the most bizarre thing to say. We took a very, very negative view. At the beginning of this, I turned around to my co-founder and said to Corinne, this is going to be bad. And it's going to be bad not because of the lockdown. It's going to be bad because the lockdown, in some shape or form, is going to be with us for 24 months minimum. And this was 3 weeks before we had the final lockdown. The final lockdown was estimated to be 3 weeks. And it's remarkable because we seem to have taken a view that things are going to be really bad. As bad as they've been, and worse than what we expected. Our energy around how we have managed our business and what we do on a day-to-day basis has increased with every subsequent day. We haven't fatigued. We haven't felt sorry for ourselves. We have been preparing for the worst and only hoping for the best. And it's been a mindset that has been enormously valuable. So Dave, I know you, Mr. Dave Harris, and I know that this opportunity has been amazing for you because you have been on the digitization path for some time. It really would have brought things to life for you.
Should I answer you, Pavlo?
Yes.
It's been a blessing and a curse because I've got different businesses in different games.
I know
But
that.
as Shane will attest, I've been looking at winding down the one side, because to put your analogy in perspective, I was in the engine room.
In the engine room. We're going to talk a lot about that now.
I was stuck there, and I kept running up to the bridge to try and steer the new business, and it's impossible to do both. I'm exhausted. So, in a funny sense, this has boosted the digital part of it, but it's also given me an opportunity to wind down the other parts. Yeah.
There we go. You see, there's a lot of resetting that's been taking place. From Joshua, digital engagement with clients is more tiring and emotionally draining. Hey, listen, Joshua, it depends how you do it. Excuse me. You know, there are many ways to do it. Screen-based engagements are quite intense. The lived reality that I've experienced personally is that the efficiency of engagement has been unbelievable. Conversations for me to get from A to B that typically would take possibly 90 minutes in certain cases, we're getting through in about half an hour. And the intensity, the pace, the volume of conversations has increased enormously. So the efficiency of engagement has been remarkable. And I'll share a few tips on what we've certainly learned around that. Shane, marketing and processes completely. You know, it's fascinating to see what's happening out there. I don't know if you guys are following very closely what's happening to social media and media in general. Media is a massive, massive free fall. It's in huge collapse. And I had been waiting for this piece of legislation to come out. And of course, who's leading the legislation? The Australians. Why? Because Australians are all about fairness, as long as you're not an indigenous Australian. But besides that, they see themselves as a society of rules. And rules are there to be observed. Rules are there to be followed, because they believe rules create a fair environment. An environment where everyone can eventually be the same. So something that would be horrifying for most of us as wild, woolly South Africans, but very useful in other contexts. And the piece of legislation that has just been passed in Australia, to my absolute delight, is that Google and Facebook posting any news from a news organization is now obliged to share the revenue generated by that content with the news organization. And Australia has passed this quite restrictive legislation with the view to try and help news brands survive. And the reason that this legislation has been passed is because of two things. Firstly, those media platforms are all about a race to the bottom. It's impossible to compete with them financially. It's impossible to catch up and compete with them now. They're necessary because we all use them. And the Australian government has turned on and said, however, if we don't let our news brands survive, in effect what we're doing is we're killing journalism. And journalism is a fundamental and critical element of free speech and democratic institutions. So in order to help our news brands get paid for the content that they generate, which is good content because it is journalism before it is gossip. Google, if you want to operate in Australia, Facebook, if you want to operate in Australia, here is the new provision. I think it's a fantastic turn of events. But what it has gone and done, Shane, is it's made marketing a real challenge, because the world of marketing has become very, very competitive. It's become very restrictive. And in many ways, those platforms which were built essentially for SMEs are now dominated by corporates. Your pay-per-click advertising, your friends that you have created on Facebook, the followers you've created on LinkedIn, your followers on Twitter, it's all BS. You can make a posting to your followers. You will get between 2 to 5% exposure to your followers. For the rest of it, even though you've developed your followers, it's a pay-to-play model. And that pay-to-play is running at rates only affordable to corporates. So I think we're going to see a shift. There's a lot of legislation coming out to constrain and reshape Facebook, Google, Instagram, Twitter, etc., etc., etc. And we will eventually get to a place where I think social media will be useful again, because it certainly hasn't been. Okay, we've got some nice questions coming through. I'm going to be answering a lot of those during the course of the next 40 minutes or so. Can everyone see the presentation? Thumbs up is good. Excepting if you do a thumbs up, this is the latest. Every time Trump goes for a photograph, he's got that tiny little thumb that he shows. That enormous thumb that he shows, in case he's listening in. So I'm uncomfortable doing this. And you can no longer do this because that also has become a very controversial symbol. So maybe just a nod is fine. Right, we're going to talk about resetting, rebuilding, and reigniting a business. And guys, the reason that's important is because if you do what you did pre-COVID and you did well, it meant that you understood who you were serving, and more importantly, who you were serving found value in what you had to offer. But here's the thing. I myself only ever buy anything if it solves a problem for me. Some of my problems are life-threatening, and some of them are about inconveniences, and some of them are to do with my own personal psychology. There is no such thing as luxury in the economy at all, at all. For those of you who've had the opportunity to read Sweat Scale Sell, a book that we produced last year, we spoke about Ishmael, the retailer, selling very expensive watches. He thought he was in the luxury market, and in fact, he discovered he was actually in the psychological problem solving and money movement market. Those were the problems he solved. To the extent that you understand your business is the extent that you understand who you serve. Because if you try and be everything to everyone, you'll end up honestly being nothing to anyone. You'll end up always competing on price and terms. And I know one or two good accountants that would say that is a really crappy place to be. So let's get into it. The context is we're all about crises. That's the world we're in. And crisis, of course, is a Greek word, and it originated 300 years BC during the Roman dominance area. And what it means is a change of state of health. So everything would be fine because it was individualized to people, but the moment your health took a turn for the worse, they described that turn for the worse as a crisis. It was a change in state of health. And the other thing that became very, very clear in a recent a book that I wrote on crises, and when I looked at crises and studied them, I realized that they are here to stay. I also realized that they are part of everyday life because they take many, many forms. Brexit, completely out of the blue, created an enormous crisis in the leading, in a client of ours in the UK, an Italian business that had attained almost like freedom of the city status within Italy for having sourced genuine Italian products that it supplied extensively throughout the UK to all Italian restaurants. And I remember speaking to Andrea when he turned around and he said to me, 4 days after the vote to Brexit had come out, and he said to me, Pavlo, all our investment plans, all our growth plans in the United Kingdom have to be put on pause. Until we understand what this means, I don't want to spend any more money in this country. Out of the blue, nobody expected it. The trade war that Trump started with China almost collapsed. Another client of ours in the United States, which is a British-owned brand of baby seats, he completely messed up the supply chain of that business. They thought that Trump was serious. They thought that his words were intended to be real. and instituted, they immediately took their investments in their suppliers out of China back into the US, only to then see that the tariffs were not applied to fully imported baby seats. And from being one of the leading brands of baby seats in the United States, they fell to position number 5 in 3 short months. And there are many, many other crises that happen. Burst water pipes, a big client not paying you money, theft of IP from a staff member, a fight in a partnership. Crises come and crises go. The only thing we can be sure of is that it's part of everyday life. And in that, there are many opportunities. I don't want to get into all of these because I'd rather get into the opportunities specifically centered around your businesses. There are many. This bottom one here, one of our clients was an importer of Remy hair. So Remy hair is real hair that is, oh, it sounds absolutely terrible, but it's harvested in India because Indian ladies have some of the best quality hair. And people in poverty would often go to places of religious worship. They would shave their heads, and those environments would then sell the hair into environments where people want to buy, what are they called? Things that you add into your hair. It gives you fake hair in a sense, but it's real hair. And a good head of Remy hair would come in at a cost of around 3,500 Rand and last you 4 to 6 months. Weaves, thank you, Dave. Weaves and extensions. Thank you, John. Maybe I need a few. That could be helpful. And they were importing an Italian processed brand. And under fear of moving into a mid-market affordability brand, the Italians would always say to them, if you bring on any second-tier brands into your business, we will remove our agency away from you. And then what happened? About 7 years ago, there was a volcano that erupted in Iceland. Do you guys remember? And it spewed dust up into the air. And that dust interfered with all air travel. And air cargo fell on its back foot. They were found without stock. They had the engagement with the Italians, and the Italians then agreed that they could bring on a second-tier brand, which they found in Brazil. So through the crisis, opportunity came into the market for them. They now carry 2 tiers or 2 brands for 2 affordability levels of Remy hair. If you learn to accept and adopt and embrace crises, crises change the status quo. And in any instance where the status quo has changed, there's an opportunity for people to lend you an ear and lend you an eye on offerings that you develop that are now relevant in this new world as opposed to offerings that might have been relevant previously. I want to very quickly talk about the suggestion that Dave gave us. And I like to use this analogy because this analogy gives you perspective. It gives you a bit of distance. It makes things less personal when we talk about a business. Building a business is no different to sailing a ship. If you think about it, all ships sail in the open ocean. And the open ocean at the moment is choppy and stormy and unpredictable. This crisis is not personal to any of us. In the early stages when it first appeared, man, I took it personally. I was meant to be in the UK. I got locked down over here. All the plans, all the meetings, and the investment in making all those meetings suddenly came to a grinding halt. I took it personally for at least 3 or 4 hours and quickly transcended beyond that. We are all sailing in the same open ocean. It is horrible. For some of us, we're in the midst of squalls. So if you're in the entertainment business, if you're in the social economy, if you're in an economy that moves people, entertains people, engages people extensively, it's certainly been rougher than if you're not in that side of the economy. But here's the thing, that when you leave harbor, you need to depart with a purpose. In other words, why are you sailing? And where are you sailing to? If you don't know where you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and you don't know where you're going to, you can't navigate safely to get there. You also cannot allocate the right level of resources. How much food, fuel, and water do I need to leave where I am and arrive safely and reliably to where I want to be? Most of us get wrapped in the day-to-day activities of our business. The third element is the design of the hull. This particular ship is designed to find lost anchors. Anchors are very, very expensive and they're enormous, and they break far more frequently than any of us anticipate. So this ship, as you can see, it's got all the hitches and shapes and cranes to it. It's designed to go and find the lost anchors of these enormous cruise liners and oil tankers and cargo ships. And it has a hull that's very, very sturdy, nice love handles on the side you can see over here, which gives it real stability. Its engines are positioned in a very particular kind of manner and way, and it retrieves anchors. Your hull, in effect, is going to be similar to the sector industry you serve. It's called the business model. The design of your business will be governed in part by the sector you're in. The example I gave earlier about testing the hull, the best way to test your hull is to test your hull in an instance when you're sailing in a storm, because it shows you the weaknesses. Every ship has a crew, the right people doing the right thing at the right time. And trust me, when you're out at sea, I spent 3 years in the Marine Navy, and the storms come. You want to know that everyone on that ship is doing exactly what they're meant to be doing when we have storm level 1, storm level 2, storm level 3. Because those activities are designed to get you through the storm safely. In a business, we want our teams to be made up of people doing the right thing at the right time and at the right price. And then finally, Dave, we all have a choice, mate. We either are in the engine room or on the bridge. For us as business owners, we should be in both locations. The engine room is below decks. It's over there. It's a horrible place to be. It's dark. You can't see what's going on. But keeping those engines moving is critical because that gives you propulsion. That's the momentum in your business. Let's call it sales, revenue. That's what the engine room drives. It's busy. It's constantly taking strain. You constantly have to tweak the engines, especially in a storm. Or you can be on the bridge. And the bridge is wonderful because it gives you a 360-degree view. You have all these instruments and dashboards, and you can control the velocity of the ship. But most importantly, what the bridge does is it gives you direction. So if the engine room gives you propulsion and the bridge gives you direction, as a business owner, where should you be spending your time? Because if you can build the engine to operate on its own, and you can get your crew orientated around driving that engine and ensuring that it's maintained and working well, surely your role as the single biggest investor in your business needs to be centered on the bridge, where you make sure that your final destination will be achieved. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'd love to see your replies. What is your final destination? How do you see it? Where are you going with your business? 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now, what does your final destination look like? I hope I spelled that right. I suffer from a little bit of dyslexia, but you know, we're all friends. Of course, We do what we do in order to earn income. Absolutely. Of course we do. Simone, end goal is acquisition. Dave, changing the world. I've always loved your idealism. I connect strongly with it. Yeah, of course, Michael's an accountant, right? It's all about building an asset. John, asset of value. Oof, Jolene, are we going global? We did a show very recently on 702, The Money Show, on why South Africa is so perfectly designed to build out a global business. And I would recommend you listen to it, because honestly, what we said in that show really is the case. It's a wonderful, wonderful country to incubate global businesses in. No one knows that you're doing it, you see. And if you can build it out over here and test everything in your business, for so long as you digitize smartly and you've captured your IP cleverly, when you enter into a developed economy, you're entering with a head start already. So I was facetious when I said doubling turnover, because most people I speak to say, that's my goal, I want to double turnover. So I'll share a hard reality with you, a truth, an absolute truth. There are only ever two destinations for every single business in the world. It's either a sale or it's a form of closure. And 94.6% of businesses started globally fail to sell. Mostly they close at an enormous cost to the business owner and the business owner's family. Some of them close by way of a succession plan, where they hand over the business to the next tier of management, or they hand it over to family. And the unspoken truth about most of those deals is the quantum that you valued your business at before you handed it over, and the terms you give on succession are mostly only 50% ever met. It's a rough end. Okay, so with that, let's get into it. The most important thing in getting your business built right and moving it to a final destination, which I agree with all of the folks over here who said acquisition, an asset of value. And Dave, you and I are going to have a big debate over the idealism. Idealism is important because that's passion. Purpose is the hard reality of how you design a business to not only meet your passion, but to meet the end goal. And the end goal is, with everything you pour into your business, you need to be sure that when the time is right and when the day comes, you can exit it cleanly for a massive capital gain. Because that's what creates legacy wealth and next level growth in the family environment. With the crisis, all of us went through a process of denial. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is a remarkable woman. She is a Swiss-American psychologist who dedicated her life to understanding grief. And she was fundamental in the establishment of the hospice environment. She spent her entire life working with people who were losing loved ones and seeing how she could help people transcend the loss and reclaim their lives again. She is the data version of Mother Teresa. And what she said is, in an environment where you're losing someone you love, the first thing is you deny that it's going to happen. As you realize it's going to happen, you move down the curve to a place of frustration. And that frustration is an indication that you have no control over the destiny of that person. The inevitable is going to take place. When you lose them, you go through a process of depression and you sit in that well. The way out of it is to start doing things differently. You need to recraft a life without that person. And you do so by experimenting. You then see what works and what doesn't work, and you take a view on how you're now going to create a new life for yourself. And folks, I can tell you for an instant in time, and based certainly on my history with businesses that I've built and crises that I've endured, I have gone through this grief cycle so many times. Yes, it was designed to indicate how you work with a loved one. But man, I love my business. I love what I do. I so believe in it. I so believe that it can change the world and make the world a better place. I grow, I stretch in it. I meet incredible people. It gives my life meaning and purpose and value beyond the financial benefits. It is me and I am it in many ways. And when it gets threatened, I experience that on a frequent basis. When COVID came, the first thing we did with most of our clients was to understand the Kubler-Ross curve and see where they were, because different people transcend through this differently. When COVID was evident and the lockdown was taking place, my frustration turned into anger, and I threatened to kill people who got in front of me when I was in the traffic. Yeah, okay, my windows were up, no one heard me, but the expression of my anger was just rage that I was now in a situation where things were going out of control. I was unable to have what I wanted and what I planned for. And that lasted about a day or two. I then fell into depression, and I sat in the bottom of that well for at least 3 hours before immediately we started to make changes in the business, experimenting to take a view on how we can now work in this new reality. To the extent that you understand where you are in the Kubler-Ross curve, know this: it impacts the way you see things, it impacts the way you hear things, and it impacts your attitude around things. It is impossible to transcend crises if you are in a depressed state, angry state, or fearful state. It is simply impossible, because your brain and heart will only let you see, hear, and feel the negative of all the signals out there. So it's really important to understand where you are in this curve and to get through out of depression into experimentation as fast as possible. Because when you experiment, you claim back your power to sail the vessel in the storm as opposed to being fearful of the storm. Equally important, you've got to understand where your team is. All of a sudden, you get into experimentation, but if your team members, your employees, your suppliers, your customers are in the frustration or depression space, you will wonder why you're not getting through to people. Because you've managed to transcend out of necessity into experimentation, but you're saying, where the hell are my customers? Why are they so negative? You know, I spoke to Angelique and I said to her, we're going to do this. And she nodded furiously, saying it was a good idea. Why is she not doing it? And it's not because Angelique's being resistant. It's not because she's being resistant to change. She might not be able to even see, hear, or understand what you mean. So understand where you are first. Understand where your team is. And when you engage with your customers, understand where they are. It goes back to the earlier question about screen-based selling and how you engage with people. It's very, very different. In the midst of the crisis, in the midst of the lockdown, we were advising all our clients to change the way they sell into relationship engagements as opposed to transaction engagements. What that relationship engagement does is it lets you reset. You've got to change the shape of your propeller. And reset from a leadership point of view means you've got to get back down into that engine room. Because when that storm is wild and people are being pushed around and bashed against the gunwales of the ship, and that engine is creaking, taking strain, the way you lead in a battle is from the front. The way you lead in a stable environment is like a general from the back. A crisis needs your team to have you in the engine room, leading one foot in front of the next through directive, commands, and example. They need to see that you are with them. So leadership over here is from the front and in the engine room. And the entire purpose of the reset phase is to reset your offerings and business model. What worked pre-COVID will be different to what works post-COVID, because your customers, I promise you, have got changed realities. The second thing you need to do when that storm hits is you've got to get your team quickly aligned to your survival strategy. And that is getting your team to talk to your clients and saying, what's changed in your world? Because remember, if our purpose is to solve problems for our clients and their environment has changed, it means their problems have changed. So what are their economics looking like? How do they want to be engaged? What are their fears and concerns? The problems you solved for them pre-COVID, how have those problems changed? Because if you can hear well, it allows you to reset your offerings to meet your client's ability to hear, see, and understand how you can be of value to them in the midst of the storm, which should look differently to how you could be of value to them in a calm, predictable environment. You've got to reward engagement for those team members that engage with suppliers, engage with customers, and understand the changes that are needed in the business model to reset your offerings. The purpose over here is to be relevant as fast as possible. Because guys, I'm telling you now, we have seen this for the last 159 years. Economic cycles happen consistently. And crises come and crises go. And the changed environment benefits those who got relevant the fastest and the quickest. Interest rates have dropped. Money is being flushed into the economy in order to try and kickstart the economy again globally. 6 months from now, you will be in an environment where you will have 20 to 30% fewer competitors who did not make it through the reset period. And for those of you that are on the front foot first in this choppy, uncertain time, you will be getting access to the cash flows, the revenues, and the engagements with clients quicker than your competitors who are still on the back foot, doing what they did pre-COVID in this new environment. You want to pull innovation from your customers and pull it out of your suppliers. Tell your suppliers that you need things done differently and understand what they're doing differently in order to accommodate your changed environment. And in the same way that you demand that from your suppliers, put your customers in a position where they demand it from you. Because innovation should always be customer-led. Once we've got the reset right, we need to rebuild. And the rebuilding piece is the process of turning everything you are doing into a system. Activities in a sequence that can be measured and taught, most importantly. If you think about it, the way you market, activities in a sequence that can be measured and taught. The measurement is lead generation. Your efforts to promote your business must result in leads. Sales, activities in a sequence that can be measured and taught. When someone knocks on your door to acquire your service or product, the way you engage with them is organized into a set of activities that logically help that potential customer or client understand how you can be of value to them and why they should be buying from you. The only measure over there is lead conversion. Operations, the process of fulfilling your obligations to your customers and clients once they've bought. Activities in a sequence that can be measured and taught. It's a measure of quality. How do you take the friction out of that process as much as possible? That's what I mean by architecting and building out a business. It needs to be built on the back of systems, because systems implemented are predictable and reliable. It's what allows you to get the right crew in place. And if you have your crew operating systems that you can measure and teach and manage and maintain, it starts letting you move from the engine room back up to the bridge. It is the truest definition of scale. Here, you're getting your team to move from relationship engagements into transaction engagements. Truth is only ever found in action. Janet, if you turn around and said to me during the reset period, yes, Pavlo, this is my reality, this is how things have changed. And I turn around and say to you, so Janet, if I do differently A, B, C, compared to how I did it pre-COVID, would that work for you? And during the reset period, you said, yes, it would be very helpful. The rebuild period is where I'm going to hold you to account. This is where the rubber hits the road. Because I'm going to say to you, Janet, we've done it. Now let's transact. The rebuild period always goes through a little bit of uncertainty. A reset continues into the rebuild period. But when Janet eventually buys and strikes a deal with me, the systems of engaging Janet, the systems of converting, and the systems of fulfilling is what I'm busy building as my new blueprint of my business design. Over here, the intention is to get the systems built. And you want to get them built fast, because the quicker you can get to the bridge with certainty, so that you can now reignite from the bridge. Your role over there is leadership from the bridge. You're moving back to being the general rather than the warrior. You are looking for next level growth and value opportunities. And you want to reinstitute a different way of doing things. Leopards don't change their spots unassisted. The habits that your staff and your team and yourself had pre-COVID need to be different now. Systems ensure those changes. And your leadership from the bridge must be system driven. Because if it's system driven and you're insisting that your team adopt systems and adopt them fast and hard, it means that the reset and the rebuild has taken place, and it means that you can spend 70% of your time on the bridge. Because on that bridge, I promise you, you will come across competitors who are failing. They have not reset, they have not rebuilt. And your opportunity to acquire from them their customers, their talent, stock for 30 cents in the rand, plant and equipment for 50 cents in the rand. The opportunity from the bridge to find competitors' customers that are finding that your competitors are not providing them with reset and rebuilt offerings relevant to this new world gives you an opportunity to invest sensibly into marketing. From the bridge, when you look at how the systems are operating, it lets you see where you can start digitizing some of the systems in order to create efficiencies in your business model. None of this is possible if you're in the thick of the engine room. You need two things: the ability to see, in other words, perspective from a distance, and data to see what's working and what's not in terms of lead generation, lead conversion, and lead fulfillment. These elements, getting them right and baked into your business, and then moving to a point of digitizing certain aspects of that, begin to kill distance. One of the interesting facts around Aurik, our business, we have been working in the international market now for about 2 years. Our greatest increase in foreign clients has occurred in the last 3 months. And it's due to two things. When COVID hit us, we digitized our entire business. And the second thing is, because we are South African and we have lived through untold shit in the last 3 months around our economy and the weak, poor leadership of our economy and the unreliability of Eskom and currency fluctuations that are beyond frustrating and ongoing political uncertainty, we have become resilient and mentally fit without even realizing it. Our clients in Europe are used to a cushy, easy ride. Our clients in the UK have always been looked after. Our clients in the States are a little bit tougher. But we have not come across people with the same level of unconscious mental fortitude that we ourselves have. It is a massive advantage. I want to close. The winners have got two aspects right from what we've seen. Right mind, which is an absolutely consistent growth mindset. And I've been challenged on this before, because surely in a crisis, you shouldn't be thinking about growth. In a crisis is where you need to double down on a growth mindset. A growth mindset doesn't mean you're throwing money around. It might mean that you tighten up in the reset phase in order to build a kernel of strength to re-expand in the rebuild phase. And the second thing is right action. And that right action is about building the business differently. It's about leading from the front until things start to settle. And when you see it settling, it's about quickly getting back up onto the bridge so you can capitalize. And I'm sorry to say it this way, guys. I'm really sorry to say it this way. On the misfortune of others who have not taken advantage of the crisis. Those individuals who stayed in the well of depression and did not transcend to the other side of the Kubler-Ross curve. Because we owe it to ourselves to make up the lost revenues of the last 3 to 4 months. We owe it to ourselves as private business owners, given the risks we take on a daily basis, to build our businesses into our greatest wealth-producing assets. We need to capitalize on the crisis because crises mean change, and change for us, leading from the front, provides us with our greatest opportunities. Excuse me. So 6 months. Historically, it's been shown that most recoveries, 60% of all recoveries occur 6 months after the crisis. 6 months. We locked down effectively in March, April, May, June, July, August. Oh dear, we're a month away. From an Aurik point of view, we've certainly seen it in our client base. When the lockdown happened, we saw the impacts of a very, very good January, February, and part of March. Turnovers were up, jobs were up, profitability was solid. We moved through to April, absolute crash in profitability. Turnover started to fall. May, jobs were shed like we've never seen before. The reset phase that we instituted through our client base was intense and aggressive. Remember, we had the attitude that this is going to be around for 2 years. So we cut back hard, and we encouraged our clients to cut back hard. We got them to negotiate with their suppliers hard. We got them to stall rental payments left, right, and center. We got them to go and speak to SARS and delay all sorts of payments. We got them on the phone calling their clients and customers to begin the reset phase. May, profitability shot up. Turnover fell, but by a far smaller percentage. July, we saw turnover pick up, we saw profitability pick up, and we saw jobs increase again. I think from an SME perspective, if the reset, rebuild, reignite process has been implemented, those businesses certainly have seen the bottom. I can't wait for the August figures because I think they're going to be far better than July. And I think the October figures moving through to December are going to give our clients the recovery of the lost revenues for March, April, and May. We're at the bottom, I believe, if you've done the reset, rebuild, reignite piece right. And with that, I'd like to open up for any questions if there are any. Wave your hand at me so I can call you out. And Simone, okay, your question. I tricked you.
You definitely did trick me. I thought you were checking who's paying attention. Yeah, I think in that curve, I've been only recently stuck in the doldrums, and I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to actually listen to you speak, because I'm finding it challenging to actually move out of that depression and into the experiment phase. But you've actually ignited a couple of thoughts and taken the state of paralysis that I feel and kind of shifted my mind a little bit. So it's more a thank you than it is a question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know what? Listen, I want to share a story with you. I've been doing martial arts for a long time. And about 10 years ago, my teacher turned around and said, hey, listen, I've decided that it's important in life, because obviously it is, right? To learn to jump from a 3-meter height and land on the ground battle ready for when you're about to be attacked. And I said, excuse me? He says, yeah, surely that's important. Surely that's something we should always have in the back of our pocket. In case you're standing 3 meters high and you're being attacked, you need to be able to jump down and get ready to defend yourself. It's an occurrence that's likely to happen in everyday life. Yeah, sure. So after we got through that joke, he said, right, I'm going to teach you how to do it. And I thought, gosh, what does 3 meters actually look like? Now I'm 1.85 meters tall. So 3 meters is actually almost 5 meters. And when you look down from your eyes to the ground, and it's almost a 5-meter height, it's bloody terrifying. It's actually quite a big distance. And unlike kids that you can drop and they bounce, well, I read that in a book, but anyway, we as adults, when we drop, we don't bounce. We kind of break a little bit. And what he did, Simone, is he made me do incremental increases in heights. The first height he gave me was a 30-centimeter block, which I had to stand on and jump down, ready to fight. And he made me jump off it 1,000 times. And every time I jumped down, he spoke about my footwork. And once I got the footwork right, he spoke about my ankle position. Then he spoke about my knee absorption. Then he spoke about my back. And he made these tiny, tiny, tiny incremental adjustments so that the last 500 jumps were absolutely consistent in right foot, ankle, knee, back position. And then he progressed us a year later to 60 centimeters. And I promise you, 3 meters is a cinch. It's neither here nor there now. But it's taken thousands and thousands of jumps to get right. And the point that I'm making is, I promise you, the only place you ever find truth is when you act. And here's the thing. If you look at what you need to do to get your business right, and you see it as this huge thing, you will never build the courage to take that very, very first tiny step. And what you do in a crisis and what you do to get out of a depressed state is you have to experiment in very quick iterations with tiny, tiny, tiny steps so that you don't find it overwhelming and you don't risk the farm for what you think might be the new approach that you need. And once you've taken that step, see what worked, see what didn't work, double down on what worked, ignore the rest, discard it. If you take tiny steps, you don't become attached to a way out. If you take a view, this is the path out, you become very attached to it. And the moment it doesn't work, what happens? You fall back down the curve into a depressed state. I thought this would work, it didn't work. Now I'm back to where I started. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas? Shane.
Pavlo, yes. You spoke earlier, with regards to be it dealing with customers or suppliers, and you can see that on the Kubler-Ross curve, they still sitting in a position of frustration or depression. Have you got any tips or advice where you encounter such a situation, how you gently coax them or try and move them along the curve?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question, because the first thing is you've got to try and figure out where they are on the curve. And you've got to figure out how they see the world. Because it's funny, if you look at the last 5 years of a lot of our views in the world today are impacted and affected by social media. And I always ask people how they're feeling, how do they see the world today, how do they see the world tomorrow? And if you let the conversation flow and you ask open-ended questions, very often when people feel heard and understood and are allowed to express, you start getting a sense of where they're drawing their reference points from. What I've certainly seen is that people who draw extensively on social media are far more depressed than people who aren't drawing content from anywhere other than everyday activity. So in those engagements that we're having with clients, I say to them, how are things? How have things been for you? They start talking about their business. And immediately I say, no, I'm not interested in business right now. How are things for you? How are things at home? Because I can promise you a lot of our stress comes from home. Most of us are still working from home or have been working from home. And if you think about home, home was designed to live in. It wasn't designed to live in and work in and clean and cook and teach and manage kids and manage elderly parents and manage halving economy in the household itself. And in the first month, most of our conversations were centered around empathy built out of understanding the home environment. From there, we went into the business world and into the business space. And then from there, we asked questions around team. Because one of the things that created enormous stress for most business owners, we found, was the fact that they were conflicted around holding on to their staff and teams, both out of a moral sense of duty of not putting people into unemployment, but the harsh reality that without your team, you can't kickstart your engines again. And we had extensive conversations around team. And one of the single points of most stress was, I'm paying Shane month to month. How do I turn that into value? I'm paying Shane because I really want to keep Shane on board. I know his circumstances at home. He's also critical in me getting the business built and moving and going. But how do I give him things to do so I can be sure that we are progressing? And it was fascinating, Shane, because one of the most challenging areas is how do you reposition your team to be useful in this kind of economy? When the economy is open and flowing, most people understand why they have their team members on board. They know what their team members are meant to be doing. You got job descriptions, you got all that kind of stuff. People more or less know what they ought to be doing. But this environment, that was one of the first things we started speaking about and understanding. Because it was remarkable. In those conversations, when that kind of empathy started to come through, for so long as you ask open-ended questions, you find that people start talking, and they start talking very actively. And the next thing we then said to our team was, you need to learn to listen. Because to the extent that you listen, you get the insights. And once you've had that engagement where people have felt heard, understood, and in effect, I really don't want to sound corny, but cared for. And through that, they've started to engage and speak more actively. You can then start to progress the conversation towards saying, what do your new economics look like? What is your organization saying around this particular service that we offer? Who's staying? Who's going? What do you need to do in order to hold on to your position in your environment of work? And what would make you a leader of change as opposed to a recipient of someone else's change leadership? So it was we turned the first 6 weeks, we became superhuman. Our conversations were all emotional because that's what got people talking. And it's incredible, you know, when people can express like that, they can start to release some of the angst. Because when you felt heard and understood, you start coming out of the depression stage, and those conversations move into experimentation. And if you ask questions around how would things work differently for you, what will be valuable for you today, in hearing the answers from your clients, that gives you the ideas and the direction for the reset. So open-ended questions. We know an open-ended question, right? A question that can't be answered with a single syllable. Yes, no, 15, Joburg. Open-ended questions are questions that open up loose conversations. We also found that during the first 6 weeks of lockdown, people needed to express. They were at home. They were accessible on screens very, very quickly. There wasn't a need to make these big appointments and go through multiple layers of organizational management to simply have a conversation. Yeah, John, it's so true, hey? So true what you wrote over there, the team discussion. That's why this period over here, that kind of leadership from the front, it's realigning a team. You know, we started to reward, pre-COVID, we were rewarding transaction engagements. In the first 6 weeks after lockdown, we changed our reward structure to favor those who had the deepest and most meaningful engagements with clients and customers. And we actually codified it. So we created question sets, and the extent to which you answered the questions created a codified basis for us to take the data of many, many engagements and see what the trends would be and how we need to change the offerings. Was the biggest issue how you engage with me? Was the biggest issue how you service me? Was the biggest issue economics? And in those issues, what would be a more acceptable or absorbable or adoptable way forward? We codified it. So we took 3 aspects of the business: lead generation, lead conversion, and lead fulfillment. And we created question sets in each of the 3. And those question sets could all be converted into data. And we started to see what the 1 or 2 big issues were in lead generation, the 1 or 2 big changes in lead conversion, and 1 or 2 big changes in lead fulfillment or service fulfillment. Because everyone was emotional during that period. And the big problem is that when there's too much emotion, which is what you needed in that reset phase, sometimes it's hard to see the wood for the trees. And the data has to kind of guide you a little bit. Guys, I am 8 minutes over your time. I hope this has been valuable to you. I would like to encourage you, take a read of this. Reset, Rebuild, Reignite came from interactions we had with around 60,000 businesses in the first 3 months of the lockdown. Here in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, in Europe, a couple out of Singapore and 2 out of Hong Kong. And it was fascinating to see the different responses different businesses had, given government policy, given the shift of seasons. We're in the height of our COVID infection season. Europe's in the lowest ebb of infection season. And it's been fascinating to see the responses, not only from government, but also from businesses themselves. Chapter 7 is a big chapter in the book. It's all about digitizing your business from beginning to end, a view on how to do it. Chapter 8 is a battle plan. It goes into depth around a lot of the questions we've asked on the reset, rebuild, reignite phase. But the book is essentially about how to thrive in a crisis, any crisis. Because what's coming after COVID, that again will unify the globe, is climate. And in between now and then, there are lots of personal crises that continue. It's the way of this life, as a philosopher would say. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for making the time available. I hope you got good value out of it, and we will certainly see you on the other side. Thank
just
you.
A quick thing, Pavlo, on behalf of Maverick, I just want to say thank you for presenting to clients who joined us today. Yeah, from my perspective, it's really, in these times, I think it's been really great to hear and feel the positive energy and the insights that you've shared with us. I think it gives us a bit of courage and a bit of hope that, you know, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So thanks so much for this morning.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you very much for having me.
Great.
Wonderful, guys. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Get into action. Get into action immediately, and we'll see you on the other side, no doubt.
Great.